Hi everyone, my name is Spectreclaw and I'm so glad to see you in this video. Today, I am excited to talk about Frieren and why Frieren feels more real than most fantasy anime. Like most, I've been enjoying season 1 and I been watching season 2 and it's been having me on the edge of my seat. And honestly, I can't blame anyone. It is a wonderful show. Things are going to be a lot more light. So sit back, get comfortable, and grab a snack. Most fantasy stories try to convince us their worlds are real through sheer volume. They give us maps, timelines, political histories, magical systems, and centuries of lore. Entire episodes are even dedicated to explaining how the world works, and yet, despite all that information, many fantasy settings still feel artificial. And to me, there's Frieren Beyond Journey's End, a series that rarely explains itself. A world that feels ancient, it's lived in, and deeply personal without constantly demanding our attention. A world where history isn't delivered through exposition, but discovered through its ruins, memories, and the passage of time. And somehow, despite having less exposition than many of other shows and themes, Frieren's world feels more real than any fantasy anime that has been released in recent years, or any that I've personally seen. But that feeling is not accidental. It's the result of an extraordinary collaboration between world building, storytelling, and one of the most important pieces of the show's identity, its music, which is absolutely phenomenal. Because Frieren doesn't just build a fantasy world, it builds a world that remembers. One of the most fascinating things about Frieren is that it starts where most fantasy stories end. The Demon King has already been defeated, the heroes have already saved the world. That legendary adventure is over. And in most fantasy series, that victory would be a final episode or a final arc, while in Frieren, it's the beginning. This immediately changes our relationship with the setting. Rather than watching history unfold, we're watching history become memory and become distant past. The world exists independently of the story we're following. Every town feels like it has a past. Every monument hints at events that we've never even seen. Every road suggests countless travelers who walked it before Frieren ever arrived, and maybe even after her. The world doesn't revolve around the protagonist. The protagonist is simply moving through a world that was already there, that she lives in. And that's incredibly difficult to create. Most fantasy worlds exist to merely serve the plot. Frieren's world feels like the plot exists inside of it. Most fantasy stories create scale through geography. Frieren creates scale through time. At first glance, Frieren's world isn't particularly unique. There are villages, adventures, mages, demons, and kingdoms. The difference isn't what exists. The difference is how long it's existed. As an elf, Frieren experiences time differently than everyone around her. For humans, 50 years is a lifetime. For Frieren, it's barely a chapter, barely a drop in a bucket. This simple concept transforms the world building. People age, friends die, children grow into adults, and entire generations disappear. Meanwhile, Frieren continues walking forward, and because we experience the world through her perspective, we begin to notice something unusual. Locations aren't imposed. Excuse me. Locations aren't important because of where they are. They're important because who used to be there. A flower field becomes meaningful because Himmel once stood there. A village matters because someone Frieren knew lived there decades ago. A statue matters because it preserves someone else's memory. The world becomes a collection of emotional landmarks rather than physical ones. Most fantasy worlds are measured in miles. Frieren's world is measured in years, and her fondest of memories. And that's what gives it such an incredible emotional weight. I'm not gonna lie. There have been moments where it has literally brought me to tears. Another reason Frieren feels so immersive is its confidence in environmental storytelling. The series rarely stops to explain its world. Instead, it trusts the audience. We see ruined structures and understand that wars happened. We see monuments and understand that people were remembered. We see festivals, traditions, and understand that cultures existed long before the camera arrived. The world communicates through details just like reality. Real places don't stop and explain themselves to us. When you walk through an old city, you don't receive a history lecture every few minutes. You're not going to walk through Barcelona and someone tell you about how Middle Eastern culture mixed with Spanish culture. You notice architecture, you notice statues, you notice traditions. You infer history through observation in life. And Frieren applies this exact philosophy into fantasy storytelling because it treats its audience like active participants rather than passive observers. The world feels authentic. We aren't being told about history, we are discovering it. And that in itself is a treat. Aside from visual storytelling and writing alone aren't enough to create atmosphere that Frieren achieves. A huge part of that immersion comes from the work of composer Evan Call. When people discuss what makes Frieren special, they often focus on the characters or animation. But Evan Call's soundtrack is quietly doing an enormous amount of work. A lesser soundtrack could have transformed Frieren into a more traditional fantasy adventure. Large orchestral fanfares, constant heroic themes, music designed to make every moment feel epic. And instead, Evan Call takes a very different approach. He makes the world feel old, ancient, timeless. The music doesn't feel like it's playing over the world. It feels like it belongs to the world. Like these songs existed before Frieren's journey began. Like villagers might sing them around a fire. Like travelers might hear echoes of these melodies in distant towns. Many fantasy soundtracks feel composed for the audience. However, Frieren's soundtrack feels discovered. And that's a huge reason why the story and the setting feel so alive. Now, atmosphere is only half of what makes Evan's Call work so remarkable. The soundtrack's greatest achievement is how it mirrors the central theme of the story itself: memory. Throughout Frieren, themes return repeatedly. Memories appear, motifs resurface. But something changes every time they do. The notes often remain the same, but our understanding of them doesn't. A melody that once felt hopeful suddenly feels bittersweet. A theme associated with adventure later becomes associated with loss. A familiar piece returned carrying emotional weight it didn't have before. And that's how exactly memory works. The past never changes, however, our perspective on it does. This mirrors Frieren's journey perfectly. She's constantly remembering and revisiting moments she once took for granted. Conversations she barely remembered, acts of kindness she never fully appreciated, memories that gain meaning decades after they occurred. This soundtrack reinforces this idea in ways that are almost invisible. By the time a familiar theme returns, we aren't hearing the same music. We're hearing it through a new emotional lens, just like Frieren. Perhaps the most impressive aspect of Evan's Call work isn't the music itself, it's his restraint. Many shows are afraid of silence. Every emotional scene gets a soundtrack, every conversation gets musical support, every dramatic moment gets amplified. Frieren does the opposite. The soundtrack disappears. We hear footsteps, wind, birds, the sound of travel, the sounds of people simply existing. These quiet moments allow the world to breathe, and when the music finally returns, it carries far more impact. Great composers know when to write music. Exceptional composers know when not to. And Frieren understands that silence isn't the absence of sound, it's part of the composition. Whether you read music or not, rests are important. And those moments of stillness can make a world feel tangible in a way few fantasy stories achieve. The real reason Frieren feels more real than most fantasy anime isn't because it has more lore. It isn't because its magic system is more complex. It isn't because its world is larger. It's because every aspect of the series is working towards the same goal. The writers create history. The world building creates the passage of time. The environments preserve memory, and Evan Call's music give those memory emotional life. Together they create something incredibly rare. A fantasy world that doesn't simply feel believable. It's a fantasy world that feels remembered. Because in the end, Frieren understands something many stories forget. Places aren't important because of where they are. They're important because of the loved ones and friends that you shared them with. And through its world building, its characters, and its music, Frieren accomplished something extraordinary. It makes us nostalgic for memories that were never ours. And long after the journey ends, that's what stays with us. I hope that you've enjoyed this video. And honestly, I'm so glad that it was recommended to me in terms of this piece of media and watching it and experiencing it. And I will admit, I have watched the first 2 seasons more times than I'd like to admit, especially with a character that I can relate to so often. But I will see you in the next one. Thank you. My name is Spectreclaw, and I'll catch you in the next video.